What happens when a calm, Oscar-winning actress walks onto a daytime stage expecting a thoughtful conversation, and instead finds herself in the middle of a question so sharp it freezes the entire studio? The lights were bright, the audience was buzzing, and the view set felt like any other morning, until Natalie Portman took her seat and the energy in the room shifted in a way no one could ignore. Before we dive into this moment that left everyone stunned, make sure to subscribe to Talk Flair, like this video, and drop your first reaction in the comments, because this story only gets more intense from here. The cameras rolled. Applause thundered. Sunny Hostin leaned forward with a composed smile, her voice warm but measured. Natalie returned the smile, polite, poised, but observant. There was a stillness in her eyes, like she was already sensing the direction of the conversation before it began. The hosts exchanged pleasantries, jokes about the morning routine, laughter rippling through the crowd. It felt normal. Too normal. Then Sunny's tone shifted. "So Natalie," she began, clasping her hands, "you've always spoken about responsibility in Hollywood, about using your platform carefully. But some critics say celebrities pick and choose when to speak up. What do you say to people who think that silence at times can be just as loud as speaking?" The audience quieted. Natalie blinked once, her posture straightening. The question wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't casual either. It was pointed, personal. Natalie inhaled slowly. "I think," she said softly, "that everyone is learning, public figures included. It's not always about speaking first. Sometimes it's about understanding first." Sunny nodded but didn't lean back. She leaned closer. "But understanding doesn't always help the people who are waiting to hear you," Sunny pressed gently. "Some would say influence comes with obligation. Don't you think?" The air tightened. Natalie's lips parted, then closed. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, something between restraint and frustration. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the tension beginning to build like a storm cloud. "I do believe in responsibility," Natalie replied, her voice firmer now. "But I also believe in sincerity. And sincerity takes time. Otherwise it becomes performance." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Sunny's expression remained composed, but her eyes sharpened. "So are you saying," Sunny asked carefully, "that when public figures speak quickly, they're performing?" The question landed like a dropped glass. Natalie tilted her head, her calm slipping just enough to reveal the intensity beneath. "I'm saying that sometimes people expect instant statements, instant reactions, instant morality. And that's not always real. Real takes reflection. Real takes discomfort." The studio grew still. Even the co-hosts seemed unsure whether to jump in or stay silent. One of them shifted in her chair, glancing between Sunny and Natalie like she was watching a tennis match. Sunny didn't break eye contact. "But what about the people who don't have the luxury of reflection?" she asked. "Who need voices right away?" Natalie leaned forward now, matching Sunny's posture. Her voice dropped, not louder but heavier. "And what about expecting one person to represent everyone? To speak perfectly, immediately, on every issue? That's not humanity. That's pressure." A wave of "oh" swept through the audience before quickly fading into silence. Sunny paused. For a second, it looked like she might pivot the conversation. But instead, she asked the question that changed everything. "Do you think you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken?" The studio froze. Natalie didn't answer right away. The seconds stretched. The cameras zoomed slightly closer, capturing the tension in her expression, the way her jaw tightened, the way her fingers curled against her knee. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an emotion that hadn't been there before. "Yes," she said. "Of course. I'm human." Sunny nodded, but Natalie kept going. "But I've also spoken when people didn't want me to. I've taken positions that cost me opportunities. And I've learned that no matter what you do, someone will say it's not enough. Or it's too late. Or it's too much." Her words hung in the air, heavy, unfiltered. Sunny's expression softened slightly. "That's fair," she said. "But the public still watches. They still expect." Natalie's gaze sharpened. "And sometimes," she replied, "the public expects perfection from people they wouldn't allow to be imperfect in real life." The audience went completely silent. One host shifted, clearly stunned. Another glanced toward the producers off camera. Even Sunny hesitated, her usual confidence flickering for just a second. Natalie exhaled slowly, then continued, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "We talk about accountability. And I agree with that. But accountability has to go both ways. Toward celebrities, and toward how we treat them. Because we're still people. We still feel fear, doubt, pressure. Sunny studied her carefully. The tension between them wasn't hostility, it was intensity. Two perspectives clashing in real time. So you feel misunderstood? Sunny asked quietly. Natalie shook her head. No, I feel watched. Constantly. And sometimes that watching turns into judgment before conversation even begins. The audience nodded, some murmuring agreement. Sunny leaned back slightly, considering. For the first time, the momentum of the conversation seemed to shift away from her control. But don't you think, Sunny said slowly, that visibility is the price of influence? Natalie met her gaze head-on. And don't you think humanity should be part of that price? She replied. The studio erupted, not in loud applause, but in a stunned ripple of sound, the kind that comes when people know they've just witnessed something real, something unscripted. Sunny's lips pressed together, thoughtful. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't pushing either. She was listening. The co-hosts exchanged glances. One leaned toward her microphone like she might speak, then stopped. Natalie sat back slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with a deep breath. The emotion in her face hadn't disappeared. It had settled into resolve. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a confrontation, not angry, not explosive, but honest. Raw. The kind that makes a studio fall silent because no one wants to interrupt what's unfolding. Sunny finally spoke again, her voice softer. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Natalie nodded once. And I think a lot of people needed to say it. The audience exhaled collectively, like they'd been holding their breath. But the tension hadn't vanished. It lingered, waiting, as if the conversation had only scratched the surface of something deeper. Something neither of them was ready to walk away from yet. And the cameras kept rolling. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt charged, like the moment before thunder breaks. The audience shifted in their seats, unsure whether to clap, react, or simply watch. Natalie Portman's words still hung in the air, and Sunny Hostin, for the first time since the segment began, seemed to be choosing her next sentence with extra care. Sunny folded her hands together on the table, her posture composed but her eyes searching. You know, she began slowly, I appreciate honesty. And I think viewers do too. But let me ask you this. Do you think sometimes honesty from celebrities can feel distant? Like it's coming from a different reality than the one most people live in? Natalie tilted her head slightly, studying Sunny as if measuring the intention behind every word. It can, she admitted, because our lives are different in many ways. But emotions aren't. Fear, pressure, responsibility, those don't change just because someone's on a screen. Sunny nodded, but her voice tightened just a fraction. Still, some would argue that when you have a global platform, your words carry weight that ordinary people don't have. That silence from someone like you can feel louder than silence from anyone else. Natalie's expression grew more intense. I understand that, she said. But I think what gets lost is that people assume we always know the right thing to say. They assume we're ready, informed, perfect in every moment. And that's not real. A woman in the audience murmured softly, nodding. Another crossed her arms, listening closely. Sunny leaned forward again, her tone not confrontational, but firm. So where does responsibility begin, then? If influence exists, doesn't that mean expectation has to exist too? Natalie didn't hesitate this time. Responsibility begins with intention, with learning, with actually caring enough to get it right instead of getting it fast. Sunny raised a brow. But speed matters in the world we live in now. Natalie met her gaze. Only if we believe reaction is more valuable than understanding. The words landed with weight. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the audience as if gauging their reaction. The room was quiet again, too quiet for a daytime talk show. Sunny inhaled, then spoke with more intensity. But people are hurting in real time. They don't always have the luxury of waiting for someone to get it right. They need voices immediately. Support immediately. Natalie leaned forward, her eyes sharper now. And I respect that deeply. But there's a difference between support and performance. Between speaking because you care, and speaking because you're afraid not to. A ripple of reaction swept through the audience, some nods, some uneasy shifting. Sunny didn't smile this time. Are you suggesting people speak out of fear? I'm suggesting, Natalie replied calmly, that sometimes the environment pushes people to respond before they've had the chance to process. And that can create words that sound good, but don't mean anything. The co-host on the far end finally jumped in, her voice lighter but cautious. I think what Sunny's getting at is, when people look up to you, they want reassurance. They want to feel like you're with them. Natalie turned slightly toward her, softening her tone. And I want that too. I never want anyone to feel alone. But reassurance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in actions people don't see. Conversations people don't hear. Sunny interjected gently. But the public doesn't see those private actions. They only see what's said publicly. Natalie nodded. Exactly. And that's where the disconnect begins. Because people assume what they see is everything. The audience was leaning in now, fully invested. A few people whispered to each other. The tension had transformed into focus. Everyone aware they were witnessing something unscripted, something real. Sunny's voice softened, but her eyes remained steady. Let me ask you something personal, then. Has there ever been a moment where you felt pressured to speak, even when you didn't feel ready? Natalie paused. This time, the hesitation felt heavier. Her gaze dropped briefly to the table before lifting again. Yes, she said quietly. Many times. The room grew still. And it's terrifying, she continued, because you know anything you say will be picked apart, misinterpreted, used against you. And yet if you say nothing, that silence gets interpreted too. Sunny watched her carefully, nodding slowly. That's a tough place to stand in. It is, Natalie admitted, because it stops being about truth. It becomes about optics. The word hung in the air like a spark. Sunny's expression shifted. More serious now, less conversational. Optics matter, though, especially when people are watching to see who stands with them. Natalie's voice sharpened just slightly. But when optics become the priority, authenticity disappears. The audience reacted again, a wave of murmurs and soft claps breaking out before quickly fading. One of the co-hosts leaned back, clearly absorbing the intensity. Another tapped her pen nervously against her notes. Sunny leaned back for the first time, her posture more reflective. I think what we're circling around is expectations. The public expects something. Celebrities feel something else. And somewhere in the middle, tension builds. Natalie gave a small, thoughtful nod. Exactly. And that tension doesn't always get acknowledged. People just see the final moment, the statement, the silence, and they judge it without knowing what led to it. Sunny studied her face, her voice now calm, almost empathetic. Do you feel judged right now? The question caught the room off guard. Natalie blinked, then let out a small breath. Not judged, she said slowly. Challenged. And that's okay. Conversations like this matter. Sunny held her gaze. Even when they get uncomfortable, Natalie didn't look away. Especially then. The audience responded with a quiet, collective hum of agreement. For a brief second, the tension eased. Not because the conflict disappeared, but because it had turned into understanding. Two women, two perspectives, meeting in the middle of a very public space. But then Sunny asked one more question. And what happens, she said softly, when the challenge comes from people who don't want understanding? They just want answers. Natalie's expression hardened just a touch. Then you give them honesty, she replied. Even if it disappoints them. A ripple passed through the audience again. Sunny tilted her head. And if honesty costs you support? Natalie didn't hesitate. Then it costs me support. The simplicity of the answer stunned the room. A producer off-camera motioned subtly, as if reminding everyone of time. But no one moved. No one spoke. The moment was too heavy to interrupt. Sunny finally broke the silence, her voice almost a whisper. That's a bold stance. Natalie met her eyes. It's a necessary one. And in that instant, the tension returned, not explosive, not angry, but deeper than before. The conversation had moved past surface questions. Now it was about conviction, about values, about the uncomfortable reality of being seen by millions while trying to remain human. The studio lights felt hotter. The audience leaned closer. The co-hosts sat quietly, letting the moment unfold. And somewhere beneath the calm voices and measured words, it was clear. This confrontation was only getting more intense. The atmosphere in the studio had changed completely now. What started as a thoughtful interview had turned into something heavier, more intimate, almost uncomfortably real. The audience wasn't just watching anymore. They were absorbing every word, every pause, every glance exchanged across that table. Natalie Portman sat upright, her expression composed but intense, the kind of calm that comes when someone decides they won't hold back anymore. Sunny Hostin studied her with equal focus, the dynamic between them no longer host and guest, but two voices navigating a conversation neither could fully control. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sunny broke the silence, her tone slower, more deliberate. "You said honesty matters more than support," she said. "But in today's world, honesty can divide people. Sometimes it even hurts the people it's meant to help." Natalie nodded once, acknowledging the weight of that. "That's true," she admitted. "But avoiding honesty hurts too. It creates distance. And eventually, people can feel when something isn't real." Sunny tapped her fingers lightly against the table, her eyes never leaving Natalie's face. "Do you ever worry," she asked, "that what you say could push people away from causes you care about?" Natalie paused. The question lingered longer than the others had. "I worry about that all the time," she said quietly, "because every word carries consequences. But I worry more about saying something I don't fully believe just to keep people comfortable." The audience stirred. A few people nodded, others exchanged uncertain glances. The tension was no longer just intellectual. It felt emotional, personal. Sunny leaned forward again. "Comfort isn't always a bad thing, though. For some people, it's the only thing keeping them steady." Natalie's gaze softened briefly. "I understand that. But growth rarely comes from comfort. It comes from discomfort, from being willing to face things we don't want to." One of the co-hosts let out a quiet breath, clearly affected by the direction of the conversation. Sunny tilted her head, her voice lowering. "And what about the discomfort you cause when you challenge expectations?" Natalie's jaw tightened slightly. "Then I accept it, because expectations aren't always fair. And they aren't always healthy." Sunny held her gaze. "You're saying people expect too much from public figures?" Natalie shook her head. "No, I'm saying they expect perfection. And perfection isn't human." A murmur rolled through the audience again, heavier this time. Sunny leaned back, folding her arms as she processed that. But people don't expect perfection for no reason. They expect it because influence shapes culture. It shapes decisions. It shapes how people see the world. Natalie leaned forward, her voice steady but charged. "And that's exactly why authenticity matters more than perfection. Because if influence is built on something fake, it eventually collapses." The room felt smaller somehow, like the walls had drawn in closer around the conversation. Sunny's expression sharpened slightly. "Let me push you on that," she said. "If authenticity means saying something unpopular, even controversial, is that always the right move?" Natalie didn't hesitate. "If it's honest, yes." Sunny raised a brow. "Even if it hurts your image?" Natalie's lips pressed into a thin line before she answered. "An image built on fear isn't worth protecting." The words landed hard. A few members of the audience clapped instinctively before quickly stopping, unsure if applause was appropriate. The tension was thick enough to feel in the air. One of the co-hosts finally spoke, her voice careful. "This feels bigger than just celebrity responsibility. It feels like identity, like how you exist in public." Natalie turned toward her. "It is, because when you're constantly seen, you start to feel like you're performing even when you're being genuine. And that disconnect can be exhausting." Sunny nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful but still probing. "So how do you stay grounded in that environment?" Natalie exhaled, a hint of vulnerability surfacing. "By reminding myself that I'm allowed to be wrong. Allowed to learn. Allowed to change." The audience grew quiet again. "And do people allow you that?" Sunny asked gently. Natalie gave a small, almost sad smile. "Not often." The honesty of that moment seemed to ripple through the room. Sunny leaned forward again, her tone softer now, less confrontational and more personal. "I think people forget that celebrities feel pressure too. But they also forget that visibility comes with accountability. And that balance is hard to find." Natalie nodded. "It is. Because no matter what you do, someone will think it's not enough. Or it's too late. Or it's wrong." Sunny's eyes searched hers. "And does that ever make you want to step back? To stop speaking altogether?" Natalie's gaze hardened slightly. "Sometimes. But then I remember, silence gets interpreted too. And sometimes more harshly than words." The audience shifted again, clearly engaged, clearly affected. Sunny rested her hands on the table, her voice almost reflective now. "It feels like we're talking about fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of staying silent." Natalie met her eyes. "We are." Sunny nodded slowly. "And fear shapes decisions." Natalie replied quietly, "But it shouldn't control them." The studio fell silent again. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The cameras lingered on their faces, The intensity, the respect, the friction that still simmered beneath the surface. Then Sunny asked a question that changed the energy once more. When you walk into a space like this, she said, do you expect to be challenged or supported? Natalie considered it. Both, she said finally, because challenge without support feels like attack, and support without challenge feels empty. The audience reacted with a soft wave of murmurs. Sunny leaned back, absorbing that. And what does this feel like right now? Natalie didn't look away. Real. The word echoed. Sunny let out a quiet breath, her posture relaxing just slightly. It does, she admitted. And real conversations are rare on television. Natalie gave a faint smile. That's why they matter. One of the producers off camera shifted again, clearly aware time was slipping. But the hosts didn't rush. No one wanted to break the moment. Sunny's voice softened further. I'll be honest. I didn't expect this conversation to go here. Natalie's smile faded into seriousness again. Neither did I. A light ripple of laughter passed through the audience, breaking the tension for just a second. But then Sunny leaned forward once more, her final question in this stretch carrying a quiet intensity. Do you think people are ready for this kind of honesty? She asked. Natalie paused. Her eyes scanned the audience, their faces, their reactions, their silence. I think they're hungry for it, she said, even when it makes them uncomfortable. The room went still again. Sunny nodded slowly, almost to herself. Maybe that's the problem, she said. We're all uncomfortable, and still trying to understand each other at the same time. Natalie held her gaze. And that's where change begins. The words settled over the studio like a closing note, but it wasn't the end. Not yet, because the tension hadn't fully dissolved. It had transformed, deepened. The conversation was no longer about a single question or a single moment. It had become something larger, about truth, responsibility, and the cost of being heard in a world that listens loudly but understands slowly. And as the cameras kept rolling, everyone in that room could feel it. The aftermath of this conversation was going to reach far beyond the studio walls. The moment the segment wrapped, the studio didn't erupt into its usual applause. Instead, there was a strange, lingering pause, like the audience needed a second to come back to reality. The cameras were still rolling, the lights still bright, but something had shifted in the air. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. It felt like something had cracked open, something raw and unfiltered. Then the applause came. Not loud, not explosive, but steady, thoughtful. People were clapping not because they were told to, but because they felt they had just witnessed something honest. Natalie Portman stood from her seat, smoothing her hands over her lap as she gave a small, appreciative nod to the crowd. Sunny Hostin remained seated for a moment longer, her expression reflective, almost distant, as if she were replaying the conversation in her head. One of the co-hosts leaned toward Sunny and whispered something off mic. Sunny gave a faint smile, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. The conversation had clearly affected her too. Natalie turned toward Sunny first before greeting anyone else. Thank you, she said quietly. Sunny looked up, surprised, then nodded. No, thank you. That was real. They exchanged a brief handshake, professional, respectful, but layered with the intensity of everything that had just unfolded between them. As Natalie walked off stage, the audience continued clapping. Some stood. Others stayed seated, visibly deep in thought. A few people were already pulling out their phones, typing, reacting, sharing what they'd just witnessed in real time. Backstage, the energy was electric. Producers whispered urgently, crew members replayed clips on monitors, and assistants exchanged looks that said the same thing without words. That moment was going to travel. And it did. Within minutes, short clips of the exchange began surfacing online. Natalie leaning forward, voice steady. An image built on fear isn't worth protecting. Sunny pressing gently. Visibility is the price of influence. The studio falling silent. The tension. The honesty. Social media lit up. Some viewers praised Natalie, calling her words fearless, grounded, necessary. Others defended Sunny, saying her questions reflected what audiences genuinely wanted to know. Many said the conversation felt unlike anything they'd seen on daytime television in years. Less polished, more real. Debates sparked in comment sections. Was it a confrontation? A conversation? A clash of perspectives? A rare moment of truth? Clips replayed across platforms. Headlines formed quickly, words like intense, unexpected, powerful echoing across screens. Analysts broke down body language. Viewers debated who was right, who was misunderstood, and whether there even needed to be a right side at all. Back in the studio, Sunny sat quietly for a moment after the segment ended, flipping through her notes without really reading them. One of the producers approached her, speaking softly. She nodded, then looked toward the empty chair Natalie had just left. "You could feel that," Sunny murmured. The producer nodded. Everyone did. Meanwhile, Natalie was being escorted through the backstage hallway, her expression calm but clearly reflective. A staff member thanked her for the conversation. Another told her it was powerful. Natalie smiled politely, but her eyes suggested she was still processing it all. The questions, the pressure, the vulnerability of speaking so openly in front of millions. Outside the studio, fans had already gathered, some cheering, others simply watching as she exited. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. Natalie paused briefly, offering a small wave, then stepped into her car. Inside, she finally exhaled. Not relief, just release. Because conversations like that don't end when the cameras stop. They echo. They linger. They follow you home. Hours later, the ripple effect continued. Clips kept circulating. Viewers shared personal stories in comment sections, relating to the pressure of expectations, the fear of speaking up, the difficulty of being honest in public spaces. Others debated the role of celebrities, whether influence truly demands constant statements, whether silence can ever be neutral. It wasn't just entertainment anymore. It had become a conversation. And back at the studio, the hosts regrouped for the next segment, but the mood was different. Quieter, more thoughtful. One co-host finally broke the silence. That was heavy. Sunny nodded slowly. But important. Another host added, "You don't get moments like that often on TV." Sunny looked toward the camera, now off, but still symbolic of the audience beyond it. "No," she said. "You don't." The moment stayed with everyone. With the audience who had watched it unfold live, holding their breath. With the viewers at home, replaying the exchange again and again. With Natalie, who had walked in expecting an interview and left after revealing something far more personal. And with Sunny, who had asked difficult questions and received answers that challenged even her own perspective. Because what happened on that stage wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic in the way people usually expect. It was honest. And honesty, when it appears without warning, has a way of shaking the room. Days later, the conversation was still trending. Clips still circulating. Discussions still unfolding. Some called it a confrontation that exposed the pressure placed on public figures. Others saw it as a reminder that questions matter just as much as answers. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. They couldn't stop thinking about it. About the silence that fell over the studio. About the way two voices met in the middle of tension instead of avoiding it. About the reminder that behind every public figure is a human being trying to navigate expectations, influence, fear, and truth all at once. And maybe that was the real aftermath. Not who won, not who was right, but the fact that people were still talking, still reflecting, still asking themselves where they stood. Because sometimes the most powerful television moments aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones that leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Now it's your turn. What did you feel watching this moment unfold? Were Natalie's words justified, or did Sunny ask the questions that needed to be asked? Do public figures owe immediate responses, or thoughtful ones? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. And if you're drawn to conversations that go beyond headlines, that dive into emotion, tension, and truth, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair for more explosive and dramatic stories just like this one.